Howdy, this is Chuck with Simply NUC. Today we're taking a look at an exciting new product from Intel's NUC division, and that is called Austin Beach, and it's the second of their ruggedized products, and it's the first of what they call their element units. Now they have, it's two pieces. There is a I/O element, and there are a chassis element, and there is a compute element. Now, because they also are doing the same thing with a different form factor, which is not compatible, Simply NUC is calling this the chassis module and the compute module. So we're going to take a look. Basically, the concept is you pick a chassis with the I/O features you want, and then you pick the processor that you want to go into that. Now, you could say, well, that's kind of like a normal computer that has a socketed processor, but the processor in this case has the memory on it, it has the radio on it, it has some of the other elements, and so it's bigger than and has more I/O than just the processor. So we'll take a look at it in a moment. Currently, the chassis comes in two models. The last letter is the giveaway. This is the B. I will also show you the A. So this is the rugged chassis element, and this is Austin Beach, and this is the B model. So we're going to take a look inside next. Okay, I've gone ahead and unboxed everything because there is a lot of packaging to the pre-production box, which may not be indicative of the production box, so really didn't matter to show you the unboxing. But now we have the chassis module. We have a 90 watt, 19 volt power brick, similar to a laptop style, with an AC power cord. And so using different country cords, this can ship to other countries. We have the documentation, which has a quick start guide, which has a graphic illustration of where to put screws and so on. And then we have our international regulatory documents, multiple languages. We have this mounting plate. So the mounting plate will mount to a visa or to a wall and allows you to hang the chassis module off of it. And then there's this little holster, and the holster is for the power brick. So now you can actually put the power brick in the holster, and it can be mounted instead of perhaps hanging because of the weight. And so if you don't want the power brick elsewhere, you can put the power brick next to it. Has a place to clip the cords. So this is kind of a nice little holster that Intel has come up with. And let's see, they also give us the screws for this holster. So these are the screws for mounting the plate to a monitor and mounting the chassis module to the plate. And then we have this very interesting set of parts here. This, not only is it the antennas, which are required because it is an all-metal box. So there's the antennas that screw into the two antenna jacks on the back. We have a series of rubber plugs, and they are marked. And so we have, for instance, a USB one, which can go in this USB hole on the front, and another USB one, and so on. And so we can go around the chassis and seal up all of the plugs that we're not using, which will make them dust-proof and water-resistant. Now, this is not an outdoor box, though it could be mounted outdoors where there is some cover, not necessarily direct rainfall. The Kensington opening here for the Kensington lock is in a cavity, so any water that gets in there doesn't actually get to the board. And then we look on the back, and we have the Ethernet port. And so I'm not going to go plug all these in, but we do have a whole bunch of them. We even have the power port in case you're powering this thing internally, and we'll talk about some of the optional I/O. All right, so let's get into, so that's what all these rubber plugs are. Those are kind of nice. All right, and so next we'll take a look at the various I/O connectors that are on this chassis module. Remember that there can be different chassis modules and different processor modules that go in those chassis, so you're no longer limited to whatever combination the Intel NUC division puts out. There will be other companies making chassis modules that work with Intel's compute module. And so their compute module will go into other chassis. Now, Intel is launching 2 chassis modules to begin with, so we will take a look at both of those modules next. The Austin Beach A and B have the same front design. And so I'm only going to show the back of the Austin Beach B. This is the A. We'll start with the Kensington lock. This is actually in a cavity so that any water that gets in here doesn't get to the compute module. There is an illuminated power button. Again, it's sealed. We have a USB 3 connector and a USB 2 connector. There's no I/O or buttons on the top. It's all fins as well as both sides. The bottom plate, you can see the 2 mounting holes for the VISA plate or the mounting plate, and the 4 screws to open it up. Okay, next we'll take a look at the back of the Austin Beach A, which is also the expandable unit. The expandable unit, because this plate is removable and there's a mounting points inside to put additional electronics and bring additional I/O out through a custom plate or through this plate. As you can see, this plate has 2 DE9 punch holes, and so we can actually put 2 legacy serial ports in here, and there's support for that inside. And so Simply NUC can offer this with 1 or both ports preloaded with serial cables. We have 2 RPSMA antennas for the Wi-Fi module. We have 2 HDMI ports. We have 2 USB 3 style ports. We have a gigabit Ethernet port. We have our standard 5.5 by 2.5 positive tip DC port, and this one is 19 volts, and it comes with a 90 watt adapter. So if there is a chassis module that does not have all of the I/O that you want, it is possible to pick the expandable version, and that there will be additional I/O modules that can give you the I/O you're looking for. All right, and so this is the Austin Beach A, which is called the expandable unit. So next we'll take a look at the Austin Beach B. Okay, next we're going to take a look at Austin Beach B, which is called the gigabit version because it has an additional gigabit port. So you can see now we have 2 gigabit ports. Now, and then this also supports 2 additional USB 2.0 ports. Now, at first you might think that this is simply an Austin Beach A in which they've installed an Ethernet dual USB adapter and made an Austin Beach B, but unfortunately that's not true. It is a totally different motherboard in which this is built into the motherboard. This plate is not replaceable, and you can't pull this module out to make any changes. So Austin Beach B comes this way. So similar to Austin Beach A, it has 2 RPSMA antenna ports. It has 2 HDMI ports. It has 2 USB 3.0 ports, and it has a gigabit Ethernet, and has the 5525 19 volt power port. But in addition, it adds another gigabit Ethernet port and 2 USB 2.0 ports. There is also planned a Austin Beach C, which we may cover in a later video when that one comes out. Now, as I mentioned before, there are other companies working on chassis modules that take the compute module. So it's possible in the future you'll have more choice than an Austin Beach A or B. All right, so I did want to cover the Austin Beach A and B chassis module, and as you can see, the front is the same as the A. We're next going to take a look inside of the A. Okay, next we're going to take a look on the inside of the Austin Beach A. Before we do so, I've gone and put on my anti-static smock and my wrist strap. This is to discharge static electricity. Anytime you have exposed electronic components, you have the probability of delivering a static spark to those components and damaging or destroying them. So anytime that you open up a computer chassis, you don't want to touch the electronics, even if you have a smock on. So I've taken that precaution to start with. Let's take the bottom plate off. As you can see, the bottom plate has two thermal pads, and these are for the two DIMM socket or SSD sockets. There's two M.2 sockets inside. So the bottom plate is a nice thick plate, and it has thermal pads to draw that heat off the SSDs and then to the plate. Now we can take a look at the inside, and you can see there's kind of two cavities. We have our chassis module motherboard, which is kind of an I/O expander. We have where the compute module plugs in, and so into this socket we can plug a Celeron or Pentium, a Core i3, i5, i7. So there's various processors that plug in here. You can see the heat pipes underneath, they help spread the heat. Then over here, this is where the I/O expansion can go. So there's a couple of screws holding in this I/O plate that can come out, and then you can have another piece of electronics that bolts in here, goes all the way down here, and you have a thermal heat pipe available if you have hot components on that board, so you can cool them. And then that board can plug into various connectors on the motherboard. So the plate has punch outs for two DE9 serial ports, and we have the two serial connectors inside. We also have two USB 2.0 connectors. We have a USB 3.0 connector. We have a EDP. So this is for like a display port panel. So you can actually buy the motherboard as a motherboard, put it in a different enclosure, and drive a panel. Let's see, we have, of course, the mounting screws around. We have, this is the primary M.2 socket. This socket supports both PCI Express and M.2 and SATA M.2 SSDs. We have a second M.2 socket. This one only supports PCI Express. This takes a 2280, and this takes a 2280 or a 2242. Their front panel header, BIOS reset jumper. You can see the magnetics for the Ethernet port, and we have an internal power connector. If you are using this motherboard as a straight motherboard in another product, you can supply power through this internal connector. And then, let's see. So you can see that the two RPSMA antenna connectors have coax cables over to plugs. Now these are very sensitive, or they're very delicate, I should say. They're very delicate. And so they will plug into the compute module, which has the radio built into it. All right. So I'm going to zoom up on the motherboard and let you see the various components on the motherboard. Oops. So we're going to zoom in. There's a couple of other connectors that you can see on here as well. So if you kind of think of the Austin Beach as a chassis module that's just I/O, it makes more sense. And then we're going to talk about the compute module next. You can also see up here is the Kensington lock cavity that's sealed to keep water from getting to the rest of the unit. Again, you don't want to submerge this or subject it to direct water blasting, because I'm sure it will get in, but it's reasonably sealed up, following some reasonable precautions for sealing. All right, thank you very much. We'll take a look at the Austin Beach B next. Okay, I've got the Austin Beach B, and since the only difference is the two additional serial ports and the Ethernet port, I thought I would show you those and then show you them compared to the Austin Beach A. Now, as you can see, this isn't a module that's added. There's no added I/O. This is a different motherboard, though it is very similar. So you can see that it has the same power connector, primary SSD that supports both SATA and PCI Express, secondary SSD that supports PCI Express only, front panel header, USB 3.0 header. This is a production unit, and the EDP connector has been removed, so that may not be available in production. Two of the USB 3.0 ports, and you'll see that the two USB ports are missing, and that's because they, instead of being on connectors, they've just been wired over to the two connectors. So let's take a quick look at the difference. I'm going to try to do it. These are rather heavy, and so it's kind of hard to hold these things, so I'll probably do something like this. All right, and hopefully that is in focus enough for you to see. All right, so there's the USB 3.0 connector. So up here is a USB 3.0 connector, but there's two USB 2.0 connectors that are missing because they're wired into the USB 2.0 connectors on the front panel. We have our two serial ports, and then we have this gap here. You can see there's a gap there. But on this one, there's not that gap because we have an additional, the circuitry is on here. But it's not a modular thing that's bolted in here and connected up. It's actually part of the motherboard. So I wanted you all to see that. Next, we're going to take a look at the compute modules themselves. Now, next, we're going to take a look at one of the compute modules. Again, Intel calls these compute elements. Technically, its full name is Compute Element U Series. And there is another compute element called a Compute Element H Series. And because it's really confusing for people to keep track of compute elements U or H, which are for totally different machines, Simply NUC has taken upon itself to just refer to this as a compute module. You'll see why we call it a compute module here in a moment. So for each of the modular chassis, you can order different processors for them. This one happens to be a Celeron, and these are called Chandler Beach. So this is the Celeron, it's an 8th gen Celeron Chandler Beach. And the CM is compute module. So this actually started life off called a compute module, not a compute element, and it's still in the part number. Compute module, Gen 8, Celeron, Chandler Bay. All right, so this is the compute module. I've already opened the bag. We've already tested this one before and put it back in. Again, I'm wearing my anti-static smock and my wrist strap. We handle all static sensitive components properly here at Simply NUC to make sure that your product is in the best shape it can be when you get it. So I'm just going to show you this. As you can see, there's a couple of these tabs sticking up. These are actually pull tabs to help you remove it later on if you need to remove it. Under this pull tab is the Wi-Fi module. It is soldered down and not removable, and you can see the two antenna connectors, coax connectors. These are very delicate, and they do rip off the board if you're not careful in removing them. Of course, Simply NUC sells you the compute chassis and the compute module, or the chassis module and the compute module. We sell them to already pre-installed. All right, I've got the Austin Beach A chassis module here, and I've got the Chandler Bay Celeron compute module here. And so I just wanted to show you how these go together. Now, the best thing to do is just order from Simply NUC the various chassis module you want and compute module, as well as storage and OS. It'll all be pre-configured and built and tested in that configuration and shipped to you with a support warranty from Simply NUC. So I'm just showing this for the YouTube crowd that wants to see what's inside. But this is how this is installed. You start by removing these two retaining screws. You take the coax cables and make sure they're out of the way They get pinched and cut very easily. Then you come in and you line up the module and you kind of poke it in the connector, but don't push it in. The reason is this connector requires the board to be mostly flat before it installs. It is not an angle install connector. So you do kind of line it up. And then as you go down here, you will actually hit these two little ramps, and the ramps will help it push in as you push down. So you simply push down and the module will insert. You then come back and put the two retaining screws back in to hold the module in. And then you plug in the two coax cables very carefully into the delicate antenna coax connectors. Remember not to fold this too much because it will wear out, and this is how you get the module out. So let's talk about that. To get the module out, you very carefully remove the coax cables from the connectors. They have to snap directly vertical. You can't have any side component while you're unplugging it, or it will rip the connectors off the board. So it has to snap directly straight up. Move those cables out of your way. Remove the two retaining screws. Then you grab these two flaps and you pull the flaps back as you pull it up. You do not want to tilt it up or you will crack this connector. You want to pull it up slightly so it's off of these ramps, pull it away from the connector and continue pulling it away from the connector as you pull it up. And so that's how you get it out. You then put the two retaining screws back in, put the coax inside, make sure it's not get crimped when you put the bottom plate on. This can go into the anti-static bag that for the replacement, and then the bottom plate goes on. You can see the Kensington lock. So, and again, you want to make sure that coax cable is out of the way when you put this on, or you can crimp it. All right, so that is a look inside of the new Austin Beach chassis module, and a look at the Chandler Bay compute module. So Simply NUC is stocking, there are 7 different compute modules, and there's 2 different chassis modules. So you can choose between one of 2 chassis, and you can choose between one of 7 compute modules, and then you can choose 1 or 2 SSDs, and you can choose your OS, and Simply NUC will build the whole thing. On the expansion version, which is Austin Beach A, you can also choose 1 or 2 legacy serial cables, and they will be pre-installed as well. All right, visit simplynuc.com and take a look at the new Chandler Bay compute elements or compute modules and the new Austin Beach chassis module. And this is a really great way to create a ruggedized system that over the next few years, you can simply pull this module out and upgrade to Gen 9, Gen 10, Gen 11, and so on, while keeping your I/O consistent, maybe even in its infrastructure and not even removed. Or you can pull this out, send it back to Simply NUC. We will upgrade the module for you, test it out, and send it back to you with a new warranty. All right, thank you very much for watching this video.